The Caine and Abel Company is a mystery that's been plaguing theorists for the entirety of the amazing digital circus's run. In episode 1, our first introduction to this corporation is when Pomni is trying to find an exit. We see her running through different office buildings, opening door after door until eventually being let out into the void, before Caine steps in after being alerted on his wacky watch and takes her back to the circus. And in further episodes, we see the C&A Company portrayed in the same way, as a huge office building with a bunch of computers presumably being used to develop some sort of software. We know this because Kinger was the first person in the circus, and in episode 3 he confirms that he took 7 years of computer science before coming to the circus. So unless he worked at a completely different place, he must be a programmer at C&A. With 7 whole years of studying under his belt, he would certainly be in the position to program a complex algorithm like Caine. And speaking of Caine, let's focus on him for a minute, because he is perhaps one of the most mysterious characters in this entire show. Ever since the beginning, we've understood him to be mostly innocent, just keeping the players entertained because he is just as trapped as they are, and they're simply wasting time because they can't find a way out. But after doing research for this theory, there are actually a lot of moments that stand out to me about his character. Like in episode 1, when Kaufmo abstracts, not only does Caine just immediately lock him away and not try to help him, but if you take a close look at the scribbles on Kaufmo's wall that we see for a split second while he's losing his mind, it portrays Caine in a much more monstrous fashion, with sharp fang-like teeth and crazy psycho-looking eyes. Now obviously this was done by Kaufmo before he abstracted, so he was already losing it quite a lot by this point. But it's interesting to me that Kaufmo would even draw Caine looking like this, leading me to believe that maybe Kaufmo saw something he shouldn't have seen, perhaps making Caine push him to abstract faster. Now I know what you're thinking. Caine has literally never shown any intent to make the crew abstract. He's only ever been the fun, wacky AI that creates the adventures. And up until I started dissecting this show, I would have agreed with you. Except, there are actually a lot of blatant attempts that Caine makes to drive the cast closer and closer to insanity. For example, in the very first episode, if we're led to believe that there really is no exit to this place, why would Caine put exit doors all over the circus? Why would he try to make an office building that mimics reality? To make them think they can leave? Because if he is really telling the truth that they can't, then putting exit doors everywhere, almost like a mirage that drives the person mad, is so cruel it almost proves the point on its own. But there's actually even more proof. In episode 3, he makes an adventure that is supposed to be more mature for Zubal's sake. He even makes a section of the adventure specifically for Zubal, as seen in this part where the door says for mature Zubals only. Oh, so he's making adventures more suited for specific players. That's great. But what many of us overlooked is the fact that if only Zubal were to go into this section of the adventure, they would literally never make it out. Let me explain. In the beginning of the episode, we see what happens when each of them holds their breath for an extended period of time, except Jax. But what's important is what happens to Zubal.
Ragatha's hair noodles stick up, Gangel's mask starts spinning, and Zubal turns straight.
My limbs straighten up and f*** off.
Zubal says that their limbs straighten out when they hold their breath, presumably making it near impossible to walk or move around. And if they went into this adventure with this in mind, they would never make it out of the ending part where you have to hold your breath and walk through a cloud of souls to make sure you don't get possessed. They would get stuck in there and either stay possessed, leading to God knows what, or with them being unable to complete the mission, who's to say Caine wouldn't just leave them there until they potentially abstract? And even if you try to make the argument that no, this wasn't made specifically for Zubal, there are still plenty of things directed at Kinger that seem to be specially designed to make him lose his mind and get depressed. Like for example, when the demon mentions Kinger's wife. Caine knows that she abstracted and that it affects Kinger in a very negative way. So why would he put that in there? It just doesn't make any sense if he's actually trying to entertain them. And not to mention the sheer amount of neglect that Caine regularly shows to their mental states. You know, for an AI that claims to be all about making humans happy and entertaining its players, he seems to enjoy torturing them a lot just for the sake of torture. But what if that's actually part of his programming? What if abstraction actually has some sort of functional purpose to the game, and by extension, Caine himself? Now, bear with me here. I think that Caine is pushing the crew to abstraction in order to turn them into raw code that he can then recycle into his adventures. Think about it. Right after Kaufmo abstracts, in the very next episode, which presumably takes place the very next in-game day after he was locked in the cellar, Caine has somehow upgraded the AI in the adventures 57 times what it was the previous day. You mean to tell me that's just a coincidence? That literally hours after Kaufmo gets abstracted and sent away never to be seen again, we somehow magically get an upgrade to the adventures that Caine seems visibly excited about. But don't worry, if that's not enough for you, there are still plenty of things in this world that have been unexplained since day one that would totally make sense in the context of this theory. Like, for example, the office buildings that Pomni runs through. Now, we know this isn't the actual C&A building because she's still within the confines of the circus. So then, how does Caine know about C&A? How does Caine literally have pictures of the same office buildings that we see in the game? Well, who do we know that worked for C&A in the past, and who just so happens to have abstracted quite some time ago from the time of Pomni's arrival? Kinger's wife, Queenie. See, I don't think that Caine directly knows about C&A. The only reason I think these two things exist in his possession is because these are from when Queenie was in the circus. Notice how the pictures are Polaroids. Polaroid cameras started going out of fashion in the late 80s and 90s, with them pretty much being replaced by digital cameras in the early 2000s. Why does this matter exactly? Well, Gooseworks has confirmed Kinger's age to be 48, and with him being the first in the circus, and with Queenie presumably entering at the same time as him, we can safely assume that these were her pictures. Not in the literal sense where she brought them in from the real world, but in the sense that they are snapshots of her memory. And them being Polaroids is supposed to be a visual clue for us, that these pictures are tied to someone from this time. This would explain why the office buildings in the pilot are designed in such a backrooms liminal space sort of way. It's created by Caine, a being that doesn't fully understand what an office does and what the use of it is. So he just places assets in a fun, random puzzle-like fashion, because the knowledge of what a real-world office building is to us humans is completely foreign to him. I presume that when Queenie abstracted, this was one of the products of her code being processed into the system, the memory of the company she used to work at. And that's also why the computers are so old looking. This isn't how it looks anymore, but it was how it looked years ago when Kinger and Queenie entered the circus, which also completely explains Caine's connection to this company. I don't think he even knows it exists, or if he does, then they're probably disguised as this mysterious committee that he keeps referencing in episode 6 as a cover. He knows they're his higher-ups in some way, but I think he's purposely being misled on what they actually are. I think that Caine genuinely thinks he's creating adventures to help keep his human occupants happy. And maybe those attempts to push the cast over the edge could totally be because he's just an AI and he doesn't understand the nuances of human emotions. But I also think that in the eyes of the Caine and Abel Company, Caine serves a much different purpose: to work with this specific test group and push them over the edge, so the company can turn their memory into code in order to recycle them for the adventures and the quality of the game. We even see little examples of people who have abstracted influencing future adventures. One huge example is the Candy Queen's character seen in episode 2 bearing a striking resemblance to Queenie. Notice how the eyes are the same color and they're placed in very similar positions. This theory could also explain why Gummy Goo had some sort of sentience. With every new person that gets absorbed into the system, the AIs and NPCs become more and more aware. It never made sense to me why Gummy Goo is able to remember moments in his past. Why he's even able to comprehend in the first place that he's an NPC without him just breaking down and resetting. I think it's because of this very reason. They aren't real people by any means, but their minds are made up of different fragments of other people's memories. Now, you may be wondering, where did I actually get all these wild ideas from? Well, it's actually hidden in one of Gooseworks' old animations, one that was released years before the Amazing Digital Circus. And it's a clue so insane, so on the nose that it's crazy to me no one else has talked about this. What am I talking about exactly? Let's take a look at this part from the animation Elaine gets adopted. Now, just for context, let's briefly explain what's going on here. This person, otherwise known as Nuzzner Fubs in the animation, is dead, and is being taken to a strange place full of abstraction-like beings who then download his data to make use of it somehow. And since our main character got sucked into his little death black hole thing, she gets caught in the crossfire and has her data downloaded too, resulting in the clouds and leaves changing shape to reflect this. Now, come on, you can't tell me these don't look exactly like abstractions. They have the same eyes, the same glitchy black form, and they're even in the same type of environment we see in the cellar of the circus, a dark mysterious area filled with some sort of fluid. But the most important part here is the implication of characters' data being downloaded and reused within the world. And another key part of this that I conveniently didn't mention is that in order to be able to be downloaded, you have to not have a heart. And what do we keep seeing in the digital circus? Characters losing their will to live and their connection to humanity, or their hearts, in a metaphorical sense, being turned into code and sent away only to never be seen again, followed by the game just magically getting better without any explanation shortly after. The consistencies in theming are definitely there, so that then leads us back to our initial question. What is the circus? What is Caine? What is the C&A Company? Well, in the simplest of terms, the circus is quite literally a farm. Let me explain. We've already established that the characters are repurposed into code when they abstract in order to improve the game. And we've established that Caine, whether he's trying to or not, is actively pushing the players closer to abstracting with every move he makes. So then, what's the purpose of it all? I believe the C&A Company is actively farming the players of the circus for AI training, in order to make the best VR experience imaginable. Think about it. A personalized VR game that anyone can put on that makes a completely different game for every person. You could have your very own avatar that perfectly reflects your personality. You could have adventures and objectives tailored to your exact playstyle as a gamer. And even better is you can even get a group of friends to play along with you. None of you can die, none of you need to eat, sleep, or stop playing at any time. All the while making unforgettable memories within the game. And even if you're playing alone, the game has NPCs that are indistinguishable from real humans. You would never have to leave the game again. Everything you would need would be right there. Doesn't that sound like the absolute dream gaming experience? And all without any developers or money spent at all. If the AIs are trained to understand the player's exact desires, then it can create literally anything it needs to. No human intervention required. It would revolutionize gaming and virtual reality to a level no one can imagine, and C&A gets to reap all the rewards. But while that explanation is satisfying, that still leaves a lot of unanswered questions. Like, how do Kinger and Jax play into this whole mystery? Where are the players' original bodies? And what's actually going on in the real world? Well, I actually have theories for those as well. I strongly believe Kinger created the circus and Caine. And I also think that him and his wife entered the circus to look for bugs. Something interesting that Kinger mentions in episode 3 is how his wife was super into entomology, and that he used to hate bugs, but she got him to like them. I actually think this moment was supposed to tell us two different things. One is the message we receive at face value, that Kinger's wife was really interested in insects and entomology, like in the real world. But more importantly, they're trying to tell us the role that Kinger and his wife had in the circus. They were sent in to fix bugs, and Queenie's Polaroids proves that she worked at C&A. Note that Kinger said she was into entomology, not that she was an entomologist. I think Kinger and his wife worked at C&A and they were asked to go into the game to search for bugs, and they agreed, not knowing the extent of what they were getting into. Which leads us into our next mystery. What actually happened to their bodies when they entered the circus? Just jumping forward for a second, if all of the current members of the cast seemingly just stumbled upon an old VR headset and randomly put it on, why didn't they immediately see the bodies of the previous people and call the cops. Like, for example, if someone comes in after another person and they're just laying there with a VR headset on, isn't that gonna raise some red flags? Well, what if their bodies go into some sort of coma-like state and someone from C&A drags them away into some sort of stasis chamber to keep them alive while they're in the game? So for the entire series, the same people keep being recycled over and over again. And every time someone abstracts, the game just resets your file and puts you right back in order to keep training the AI. Now, the biggest piece of evidence for this is the fact that as soon as someone abstracts, a new player is added to the game to replace them. This could be random chance, or it could be on purpose to show us that these people are actually just the same people being farmed again and again for AI training. And while this theory does kind of have a little bit of weight, I don't actually think that's exactly what's happening here. See, if all of these characters are just the same group of people being reused again and again, it kind of lowers the stakes a whole hell of a lot. Why have funerals for people who abstract if they just come back moments later? Why cross their faces off their doors when Caine could just easily repurpose the same rooms and let everyone know what's going on? Also, not to mention, if these are the same people just being kept alive by stasis chambers, then don't you think the energy and maintenance cost would be way more than if they just hired a couple developers? I mean, if this really is all just corporate greed, then why would they waste so much resources on keeping these people alive? It just doesn't really make sense from a finances perspective. Sure, it could be the case that it's the same people, but a more likely scenario is that everyone in the circus was physically transported into the game, body and mind. So when they put on the headset, they are literally transferred into code similar to what we saw in Elaine Gets Adopted, and put into the game so they can personally train the AI. That's why they can't escape, because they literally don't have bodies anymore. They've all been turned into polygons and 3D models. So even if they were to find a way out, they would need an entirely new body to inhabit, similar to Mildenhall from episode 3. Something else important that I want to mention here are the connections to I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, because we're reaching a point in the story where I believe a lot of things are starting to overlap here. The most obvious connection is Caine himself being inspired by Am. Now, in I Have No Mouth, Am is portrayed as an AI that absolutely despises humans more than anything in the world. And in The Amazing Digital Circus, Caine is shown to be dedicated to making humans happy. Pretty different. But something important to note here is that Am didn't always hate humans. He developed his hatred after he became sentient. And this is actually really important in the context of the circus. With every single person that abstracts and gets absorbed into the code, Caine gets more and more unhinged. Almost like the merging of all of these human beings is beginning to make Caine sentient in some way as well. And honestly, by episode 7 or 8, I wouldn't be surprised if Caine develops a certain hatred for the cast, especially considering that he was the only one that didn't get any votes in the favorite character awards. Meanwhile, the real humans did. This moment also simultaneously links to Caine and Abel from the Bible, where Caine's offering is rejected by God, while Abel's is treated with favor. Even if we don't know exactly who Abel is in this context, this is still almost certainly connecting to that. But one last bit of evidence, one last key detail that everyone brushed off as solved, brings this entire theory together. Gooseworks was asked on Tumblr why Jax is afraid of corn, and she said it's because it reminds him of the farm. But then she came back later and said she may have been lying about the farm, and everyone just forgot about it. But I think this was actually a lot more than just a random joke. I think this was supposed to be confirmation hidden in plain sight. Think about it. Why would she ever mention Jax being reminded of a farm, unless it's supposed to be taken at face value? If everything we just said before is true, then the circus itself displays every single aspect that a farm does. They raise and maintain their livestock, distract them with meaningless tasks, only to then consume and reuse them after they're gone. The Caine and Abel theming from the Bible we mentioned a second ago could totally play into this as well. They were literally farmers, with Abel being a shepherd. I mean, the clues are clearly there. Every single thing we can find, from Caine's attempts to push the cast closer to the edge, to what happens to you after abstraction, and even the Caine and Abel name in the company itself strongly points to the circus being a much different place than it seems on the surface, with everyone who abstracts being harvested and recycled into the system to better the game's code, all without public knowledge and without consequence, all in the name of having the best-selling VR game of all time. But anyway guys, those are my thoughts. I know this video was a little longer than usual, but with there being so much to cover, I couldn't help but talk about it all. If you guys want me to dive even deeper and maybe explain the history of the entire circus in one long timeline video, just let me know in the comments below. There's this weird new YouTube feature called Hype, and it helps push videos like this to a wider audience. So while you're down there leaving a like and a comment, maybe hype this video up if you can. Also consider subscribing and ringing the bell if you want to see more videos just like this one. Alright everyone, that's gonna do it from me. I love every single one of you with all my heart. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.